Rosewill's Cullinan PC case is the company's most modern endeavor since their R5 released a few years ago. This is the one we saw at Computex. It ticks all the boxes that have been created by NZXT's H440, Corsair's 760T, and some of InWind's higher-end cases. And those boxes these days generally include tempered glass, which it's got in the sides and the front, and in this case, no optical drives, and then of course a power supply shroud, which every case needs these days apparently. Also, every case seems to need RGB lights, but this one opts out of that. So that is the one box that is not ticked by the Rosewill Cullinan. Otherwise, it's got the tempered glass, and that is the current trend in the PC case market. The Rosewill Cullinan mid-tower enclosure was first shown at Computex 2016 and has since been followed by the new 460X by Corsair, not to be confused with an AMD product, and was even preempted by InWind's 303. Here's the interesting part. Since Rosewill's Computex unveil, case manufacturer Anidees has released its own AI Crystal case, which looks remarkably similar to the Rosewill Cullinan. That's because Anidees and Rosewill both get their tempered glass heavy cases from Chinese OEM designer Jonesbow, which we believe is a customer of factory Godspeed casing. NZXT largely supports with its growing demands. Relatedly, the NZXT S340 that received iBuyPower's element modifications, tempered glass by the way, likely was made by Godspeed Casing earlier this year, prior to the tempered glass fervor unleashed at Computex by Rosewill, Jonesbow, all these other companies. OEM designer Jonesbow now makes its own QT03 glass panel case. The case comes with an excellent catchphrase too, which is, quote, "Chasing on the road, have you already forgotten the beginner's mind?" This is part of the modern PC industry too. As we discussed in our Who Really Makes Your Liquid Coolers article, the manufacturers mostly buy parts that are pre-made by engineering or design firms, then apply changes during the production process. Corsair, for example, institutes a number of changes on Asetek coolers prior to incorporation in the final Corsair product, but does still buy an Asetek liquid cooler at the end of the day. Logitech works with its sensor suppliers to customize firmware for their mice, further differentiating themselves from every other Avago or PMW or PixArt sensor out there. And these small changes are what set the companies apart at the end of the day, other than the sticker on the product, warranty, RGB LEDs, and things like that. But let's talk about the Cullinan specifically and then go through all the thermal benchmarks and testing. Note that everything we say about this case pretty much applies to the AI Crystal by Anidees. It's, again, basically the same thing. The same is true for the QT03. If you see any other case manufacturer selling what is effectively a QT03, or even I think that product is available in some European regions standalone, the review points we make here will apply to all of those. The only real difference is fan spec, which I'll get to at the end. The Cullinan has an expected street price of $150. For hard specs, the unit is using 5mm thick tempered glass side panels for the left and right, 4mm in the front, each secured by flathead thumb screws in 4 locations for the left and right side panels. A silicone damper sits between the screw and the glass to prevent unpleasant metal on glass contact, with the glass itself sitting loosely on a standoff. The front panel also uses tempered glass that's set within plastic housing as a single unit. Obstructing the front with tempered glass obviously prohibits any air intake, but this isn't any different from what we're seeing on modern cases making use of sleek plastic or metal fronts either. The Corsair 400C, 600C, and NZXT H440 and S340 cases all use flat fronts with no mesh, and then leverage the depth between the front of the chassis or frame and the front panel as the intake vent for the front fans. It's an approach to design that allows for intake, a cleaner front aesthetic, and theoretically reduced noise exposure to the user by directing the noise out and away from the front of the case and toward the back rather than leaking the noise out of a front mesh. To make this work, the enclosure needs to have some depth between the front panel and the frame and a grill within that cavity. We've found that a grill of about 1 inch is ideal for breathability. The same is true for bottom intakes on elevated cases, and the Cullinan meets this recommendation with a 1.2-inch gap between the front and the front glass. For fans, the Cullinan includes 3 120mm front fans with blue LEDs and 1 120mm rear fan with a blue LED also. Optionally, 3 120mm top fans can be fitted, though we've generally found that cooling performance worsens when using top exhaust fans within a system that's fitted with a tower cooler, so it'd be best to dedicate that slot to a radiator if you have one. Speaking of, the Cullinan supports radiators up to 360mm long on the top and front and 120 in the rear definitely. 140 is a bit tight though, if even possible. You'd want to check on a radiator per radiator basis. And optionally, the front fans can be replaced with 140mm units found on the AI Crystal, though you're really not gaining much from that endeavor other than potentially some noise reduction if you're running lower RPM fans. The front fans are already fairly maxed out on their usage of the entire front surface area, and 140mm fans will really just bleed over some of the air channel on the steel paneling. Once you look inside the case, you'll see that there's really not a lot more room for fans anyway to breathe through that front mesh. The case's construction is entirely steel without the glass. The enclosure is fairly lightweight and uses 0.7mm thick SGCC steel. But looking now at thermals, the Cullinan case has a fan speed controller, so it's got 3 switches, one switch on the front with 3 toggles, and those are high, medium, and low. Because of the way this particular controller works and the fans in the case, when you decrease the fan speed, it's also lessening the brightness of the LEDs to the point where the lowest fan speed setting will turn off the LEDs if you dislike them. For thermal testing, as always, we're running through our regular benchmark. It's all detailed in the article linked to the description below, which has the full review of this case if you want more information. But one thing to note, as we've discussed in our GPU content of late, high GPU temperatures in cases do actually matter. So this is a point that we haven't really made before because GPU boost is changing the game with 3.0 and with the way AMD works now. Thermals are a big deal. So an extra 5 Celsius granted by one case or another is enough of a swing that you can get some additional boost out of the clock for the GPU if you're running into a thermal wall. And that's mostly applicable to something like a reference card, like this one where you've got a weaker cooler on it, but it obviously depends on the card. The Cullinan ends up at about 36.5 Celsius delta T for its CPU load temperature. You can read about delta T on the site or on the channel, you can learn about it. And that places it right around the Corsair 400C and NZXT S340 also on this chart. Idle temps for the CPU are at around 14.5 Celsius for the Cullinan, with the fans configured to medium instead of max, which is what we just looked at. The noise is theoretically marginally reduced because you've reduced the RPM, but that also increases the temperatures. The Cullinan CPU temp jumps up to 39.15 Celsius load and 16.7 Celsius idle. That makes the medium speed configuration the hottest in this list, though the temperature difference for CPUs with this particular setup isn't hugely detrimental. With GPU load, it's a different story. We're seeing a performance of 60 Celsius for the full speed fan configuration with an idle of 1.31 Celsius, again delta T over ambient. That places the Cullinan between the InWin 303 and Corsair 400C. Medium pretty heavily impacts GPU temperatures as well, increasing load by 5 Celsius to 65.73 Celsius. And again, that's actually kind of a big deal with the worse cooled GPUs, as we discussed, because of Boost 3.0 or whatever you may be using. Speaking to build quality and ease of installation, the case is fairly easy to work with in terms of strictly aesthetics, starting with the front panel, or all of the panels actually, and the glass terminate cleanly, so there's no bleed over of the glass hanging over the edge or vice versa, which we've seen in a lot of cases with worst quality control. The steel at 0.7mm thick is certainly not the thickest we've seen on the market. InWin's 303 uses a far thicker steel for the chassis, and that's true for a couple of the other competitors at this $150 price point as well. But the rigidity of 5mm thick tempered glass, which by the way is massive, does improve the sort of structural integrity to a point that you really can't tell. The main difference here is that when moving the case around, having that thinner steel with the really heavy tempered glass does make it actually a little bit more portable than it would be if they used a 1mm thick steel or something like that. The biggest pitfall of the case is its failure to accommodate 88mm tall power supplies. Our Enermax Platmax PSU is something around a $200 unit, and it's fit in about a dozen cases that we've worked with this year, including some lower end ones, but it did not fit in the Cullinan. To get the unit to fit, we had to remove the PSU's finger guard on the fan, and that's definitely an oversight by the designers and engineers of the case, and one which could be fixed if they had just added 1 extra millimeter of height to the PSU shroud. I guess if you wanted to, you could file down the metal to get this thing there, because that's just how close it is, but it's easier to buy a shorter PSU. The next pitfall is small and has to do with cabling. The right side panel over here could use some extra thickness to better accommodate cables. So for cable management purposes, in this case, the glass is exposing the side of the case where the cables are normally hidden. So that does mean generally, depending on how clean you want to look, you'll want to manage that side a bit better. Because of the limited space, the clearance between the chassis, the motherboard tray, and the glass, there's really not a lot to work with for cable management, so that does take some extra time, and you might want to consider buying braided cables just because they're going to be exposed to the outside. In terms of build quality of the glass itself, the paneling helps strengthen the case when all assembled and makes for a pretty heavy enclosure. The glass quality is exceptionally high too. During filming, we tragically dropped the panel on a piece of metal tripod mounting hardware, and the panel received no damage or scratches at all, which is admirable and worth a mention. That's just what tempered glass is good at. You wouldn't want to do it regularly, but it is high quality glass. As an enclosure, Rosewill's Cullinan is one of the better cases we've worked with this year. It had a brief advantage in the market when it was shown at Computex between arriving, which will be within a week or two of this video, and that advantage is kind of gone now in that there's actually competition. So when this was announced, it was one of the cheaper, more workable mid-towers with tempered glass, other than things like InWinds cases if you didn't like them or they didn't quite fit the bill. Now though, several other companies have come out with competitors. That includes Corsair's 460X, which we just saw at PAX, and includes the AI Crystal, which is this thing, but by Anidees. Ease of installation is reasonably well designed. There's tons of space in the ceiling for working with a radiator, and the finished build looks good in the case. The Psu Fitment is the biggest hurdle with the case, but we found that it fits PSUs of 85 to 86 millimeters tall without issue, at least ours, and that's most power supplies on the market, including the Silverstone one we inevitably put in here because the other was just too tall. The super high-end power supplies that are 88 millimeters tall will have fitment issues, and the next challenge for Rosewill's take on this case is its competition, as mentioned. Anidees is likely also buying from Jonesbow and is selling its AI Crystal for $130 after temporary instant discount, but it has a $21 shipping charge, so that brings it up to the $150 MSRP that Anidees already lists the case for. Rosewill's case will have a $180 MSRP and will be sold for $150 after instant discount, so basically a $150 case. And it will possibly include free shipping because Rosewill is owned by Newegg, and they tend to do that with their products. We're not positive on that yet, but that would be an advantage where it would basically equal the price of the Anidees AI Crystal and the Rosewill Cullinan case. So with the real price of each case probably at about $150 after you account for the shipping and instant discounts and all of that BS for the most part, really you're looking at the differences between the two. The differences are Rosewill uses 120mm fans in the front. There's probably no real cooling advantage there. We'd have to test it to know with the Anidees fan specifically. It's not all about the size of the fan, of course. It matters how fast it operates and things like that. I guess you could look at the LED color. The AI Crystal uses a white fan. Rosewill uses a blue one. You can choose based on what you want there. And then other than that, it really comes down to things like support, warranties, brand name, stuff like that, and that's up to you to decide which you like better. The only other thing worth mentioning is the naming. There's no nameplate on the power supply shroud for the Rosewill Cullinan. They put their name on the front in glass, and then Anidees puts theirs on the power supply shroud. So if you have a preference for what the logo looks like, that's another way to choose, I guess. But I would choose based on warranty, support, expectations by brand name, things like that. And most importantly, choose by price. If one of the cases happens to go on sale, just buy that one. It really doesn't matter who makes it for the most part because the price is the same otherwise. The features are the same otherwise, other than what I've just listed, very small things, and it's the same OEM. So that's really all there is to say about this. As a case, the Cullinan, the AI Crystal, the QT03, it is a good case. I do actually like it as a mid-tower. I think it's a little expensive, potentially. The competition is going to be Corsair with their 460X, and if you like it, the InWin 303, which we liked, but it's a little bit less flashy. It doesn't have the tempered glass in the front. It doesn't have the same LEDs, obviously, in the front because there's no reason to have them. That would be an alternative to look at. That's closer to the $100 mark. It fluctuates between about 80 and 100. And then if you want to go cheaper still, there's the NZXT and the Fantex options without the tempered glass. But for tempered glass, you're basically looking at Corsair 460X, the Rosewill, Anidees, Jonesbow, QT03 Cullinan thing, which is this, and the Inwin 303. Those would be kind of the ones to look at for the most part. Corsair 460X we don't have yet, but we'll be talking about more soon. So thank you for watching. As always, Patreon link in the post roll video, links in the description below for more information. Subscribe for more. I'll see you all next time.